The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the courthouse, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. The air was thick with anticipation, a mix of anxiety and hope lingering in every corner. Karoline Leavitt sat at the plaintiff's table, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of a legal pad. She had spent countless nights preparing for this day, rehearsing her arguments and gathering evidence to support her case. Today was her chance to speak, to tell her story in front of a judge who would decide her fate. But as she glanced up, at the bench where Judge Richard Holloway presided, her stomach tightened. There was something about him, his steely gaze, his rigid posture, that made her uneasy. Judge Holloway was known throughout the legal community as a no-nonsense man, someone who didn't tolerate delays or what he deemed frivolous arguments. His reputation preceded him. Sharp-tongued, impatient, and often dismissive of those who couldn't match his level of legal expertise. For many attorneys, appearing before him was like walking into a lion's den. Yet, Karoline had convinced herself that she could handle it. After all, she wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for justice. Her case involved allegations of unfair treatment by a powerful corporation, one that seemed untouchable until now. With Pam Bondi, a highly respected attorney, by her side, Karoline felt a glimmer of confidence. Pam Bondi exuded calm authority as she adjusted her papers on the table. Known for her razor-sharp intellect and unshakable ethics, Pam had agreed to take on Karoline's case after hearing her story. It wasn't just about winning, it was about exposing the truth and holding those in power accountable. As the two women exchanged a brief nod, the bailiff called the courtroom to order. Everyone rose as Judge Holloway entered, his black robe flowing behind him like a dark cloud. He took his seat without so much as a glance at the people assembled before him. The trial began almost immediately, with little ceremony or acknowledgement of the gravity of the moment. Karoline cleared her throat, trying to steady her voice as she stood to address the court. She started by explaining the events that led her here, detailing how she had been wronged, and how the system had failed her repeatedly. Her words were measured, her tone sincere, but as she spoke, she noticed the judge's expression shift from disinterest to outright irritation. His brow furrowed deeper with each sentence, and when she paused briefly to catch her breath, he seized the opportunity to interrupt. "Miss Leavitt," he said sharply, leaning forward in his chair, "are you aware that your claims lack substantial evidence? Or are you simply wasting this court's time?" The words hit Karoline like a punch to the gut. She faltered, unsure how to respond. Before she could gather her thoughts, Judge Holloway continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "I've seen cases like yours before. Emotional appeals meant to sway sympathy rather than present facts. If you cannot provide concrete proof, then perhaps you should reconsider why you're here." The gallery murmured softly, some heads nodding in agreement while others frowned at the harshness of his tone. Karoline felt heat rising in her cheeks, embarrassment warring with anger. Wasn't she entitled to a fair hearing? Didn't she deserve to be heard? Pam Bondi placed a reassuring hand on Karoline's arm, silently urging her to stay composed. Rising slowly, Pam addressed the judge with a poised demeanor. "Your Honor, my client has presented valid concerns backed by documentation and witness testimonies. Dismissing her claims outright is premature and unjust." Judge Holloway raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Ms. Bondi, I'm well aware of your reputation, but let me remind you that this is my courtroom. Emotional theatrics won't sway my judgment." His words hung heavy in the air, a thinly veiled insult aimed not only at Karoline but also at Pam herself. For a moment the room fell silent, the tension palpable. Pam's mind raced as she processed what had just happened. This wasn't just rudeness, it was a deliberate attempt to undermine both Karoline and her credibility. Something about the situation felt off, almost calculated. Pam glanced at Karoline, whose eyes glistened with unshed tears. Though visibly shaken, Karoline nodded slightly, signaling that she trusted Pam to handle things. That small gesture gave Pam the resolve she needed. Turning back to the judge, she said firmly, "Your Honor, if there are procedural issues, we can address them accordingly. However, I must insist that my client be allowed to present her case fully and fairly. Judge Holloway leaned back in his chair, studying Pam with a mixture of annoyance and amusement. Very well, he replied curtly, though his tone suggested he had already made up his mind. As the proceedings resumed, Pam couldn't shake the feeling that something larger was at play. Judges weren't supposed to behave this way, not openly hostile, not so dismissive of due process. It reminded her of stories she'd heard over the years, whispers about judges who abused their power behind closed doors. Could Richard Holloway be one of them? And if so, what could she possibly do about it? As the morning dragged on, Karoline struggled to regain her footing. Every time she spoke, Judge Holloway found a way to cut her down, questioning her motives, doubting her evidence, and even mocking her choice of words. It was exhausting, demoralizing, and utterly infuriating. By the time lunch recess was called, Karoline felt defeated, her earlier confidence shattered. She followed Pam out of the courtroom, her steps heavy with despair. Outside, Pam stopped, abruptly turning to face Karoline. "Listen to me," she said firmly, gripping Karoline's shoulders. "What's happening in there isn't right. We're going to fix this, I promise." Back inside, Pam excused herself momentarily, stepping into a quiet hallway to make a phone call. She dialed a number from memory, connecting with an old friend who worked within judicial oversight committees. In hushed tones, she recounted everything that had transpired in the courtroom, describing Judge Holloway's behavior in detail. Her friend listened intently, then offered a bombshell revelation. Judge Holloway had faced multiple complaints in the past, ranging from verbal abuse to outright bias. Most of these allegations had been swept under the rug, buried by influential allies who protected him. Hearing this confirmed Pam's suspicions. Whatever was happening today wasn't isolated, it was part of a pattern. Returning to the courtroom, Pam's mind was racing. She knew she had to act quickly, decisively. Sitting beside Karoline, she whispered a plan, one that required courage and precision. As the session reconvened, Judge Holloway resumed his tirade, seemingly oblivious to the storm brewing around him. Then, without warning, Pam stood up, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Your Honor, I regret to inform you that based on your conduct today, I am filing a formal complaint against you for misconduct and requesting your immediate removal from this case." The room erupted into chaos, gasps and murmurs filling the space. Judge Holloway's face turned red with fury, but before he could retaliate, two uniformed officers appeared at the door, summoned by Pam moments earlier. What happened next unfolded like a scene from a movie. The officers approached the bench, their presence commanding immediate attention. One of them spoke directly to Judge Holloway, informing him that he was being placed under arrest for abuse of power and contempt of court. The judge sputtered in disbelief, shouting accusations of conspiracy and betrayal. But the officers remained unfazed, handcuffing him and leading him out of the courtroom as spectators looked on in stunned silence. For Karoline, it was surreal, a moment she never imagined possible. Tears streamed down her face, but this time, they were tears of relief and vindication. In the days that followed, news of the incident spread like wildfire. Headlines blared across newspapers and television screens, sparking debates about judicial accountability and reform. People praised Pam Bondi for her bravery, calling her actions a bold stand against corruption. Meanwhile, Karoline became a symbol of perseverance, inspiring others to speak out against injustice. Behind the scenes, Pam worked tirelessly to ensure that Judge Holloway's misconduct was thoroughly investigated, determined to prevent similar abuses in the future. Together, they proved that sometimes standing up for what's right means challenging even the most powerful forces, and that true justice begins with courage. The courtroom was eerily quiet after Judge Holloway's dramatic exit. People sat frozen in their seats, unsure whether to applaud, gasp, or simply leave. Karoline Leavitt felt her legs trembling beneath the table, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. One moment she was being berated by a man who held immense power over her life, and the next, he was being led away in handcuffs like any other criminal. It was surreal, almost dreamlike. Pam Bondi placed a gentle hand on Karoline's shoulder, snapping her back to reality. "Breathe," Pam whispered, her voice calm but firm. "This isn't over yet." Karoline nodded weakly, though she wasn't sure how much more she could take. The emotional toll of the morning's events weighed heavily on her. She had come to court expecting a fair trial, not a public spectacle that exposed the cracks in the justice system. But now, with Judge Holloway gone, there was a glimmer of hope, a chance to reset the proceedings and start anew. Still, doubts lingered in her mind. Would this incident overshadow her case? Would people focus more on the judge's downfall than on the truth she was trying to reveal? These questions swirled in her head as the bailiff announced a temporary recess. Outside the courtroom, reporters were already gathering, cameras flashing and microphones thrust toward anyone willing to speak. Word had spread quickly about the unprecedented arrest of a sitting judge, and the media frenzy was building. Lawyers, courthouse staff, and even some jurors from unrelated cases lingered in the hallways, whispering among themselves. Some expressed shock, others admiration for Pam Bondi's bold move. A few skeptics questioned whether arresting a judge was crossing a line, while others argued it was long overdue. Amidst the chaos, Pam stood quietly near the water fountain, scrolling through messages on her phone. Her expression remained composed, though her mind was racing. Pam knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Arresting Judge Holloway was just the first step. Ensuring accountability would require relentless effort. She needed evidence, solid, irrefutable proof of his misconduct, to back up the complaint she had filed. Thankfully, her earlier call to her old colleague had yielded valuable leads. There were records of past grievances against Holloway, complaints buried deep within bureaucratic files. Witnesses willing to testify about his abusive behavior were also coming forward. Each piece of information strengthened her case, but Pam understood that exposing corruption often came with backlash. Powerful people didn't like having their secrets dragged into the light. Back inside the courtroom, the atmosphere had shifted noticeably when the session resumed. A substitute judge, Judge Emily Carter, had been appointed to oversee the remainder of the proceedings. Known for her fairness and meticulous approach, Judge Carter wasted no time addressing the elephant in the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady and authoritative. "Today has been an unusual day, to say the least. However, let us not lose sight of why we are here, to seek justice and uphold the law." Her words resonated deeply with Karoline, who finally allowed herself to feel a flicker of optimism. Perhaps this new judge would give her the fair hearing she deserved. As Karoline prepared to present her case again, Pam leaned over and offered one last piece of advice. "Stay focused, stick to the facts, and don't let anyone rattle you." Karoline took a deep breath, nodding silently. This time she felt more grounded, less intimidated by the imposing figure behind the bench. When Judge Carter gave her the floor, Karoline spoke with newfound confidence. She recounted her story methodically, presenting documents, emails, and witness statements that supported her claims. Unlike Judge Holloway, Judge Carter listened attentively, occasionally jotting down notes. For the first time, Karoline felt truly heard. Meanwhile, outside the courthouse, the story continued to dominate headlines. Social media buzzed with opinions, hashtags trending as people debated the implications of what had happened. Supporters rallied around Karoline, praising her bravery for standing up to a powerful adversary. Critics questioned whether Pam's actions set a dangerous precedent, arguing that judges should be immune to such public scrutiny. Yet, amidst the noise, one thing became clear. The arrest of Judge Holloway had ignited a larger conversation about transparency and accountability in the judiciary. People wanted answers, and they weren't going to settle for vague reassurances. Behind the scenes, Pam worked tirelessly to gather additional evidence. She reached out to former clerks, attorneys, and litigants who had appeared before Judge Holloway, piecing together a pattern of behavior that painted a damning picture. One clerk described how Holloway routinely belittled staff members, using fear to maintain control. Another attorney recounted a case where Holloway dismissed legitimate claims without explanation, only to reverse his decision after receiving pressure from influential figures. Each account added weight to Pam's argument that Holloway's conduct was not an isolated incident but part of a systemic issue. As days turned into weeks, the investigation into Judge Holloway intensified. Internal committees reviewed decades' worth of records, uncovering instances where complaints had been ignored or swept under the rug. Political allies who once shielded him distanced themselves publicly, eager to avoid association with scandal. Meanwhile, Karoline's case progressed steadily under Judge Carter's supervision. With each passing day, the truth became harder to deny. The corporation Karoline accused of wrongdoing found itself under increasing scrutiny, its carefully constructed facade beginning to crumble. For Karoline, the experience was transformative. What started as a personal fight for justice evolved into something greater, a movement to challenge entrenched systems of power. She began speaking at rallies, sharing her story with anyone who would listen. Her courage inspired others to come forward, revealing similar experiences of mistreatment and abuse. Together, they formed a coalition dedicated to reforming the judiciary, demanding stricter oversight and greater transparency. Pam stood by her side throughout, offering guidance and support, but always reminding her to stay grounded. Despite the progress, challenges remained. Legal battles are rarely straightforward, and Karoline faced pushback from those determined to protect the status quo. Opposing counsel threw every obstacle they could think of in her path, hoping to wear her down. Yet with Pam's expertise and unwavering determination, Karoline persevered. Every setback only fueled her resolve, reinforcing her belief that change was possible if people refused to give up. By the time the trial concluded, Karoline's case had garnered national attention. Journalists covered every detail, highlighting both the flaws in the system and the resilience of those fighting to fix them. When the verdict was finally delivered, favoring Karoline, it felt like more than just a legal victory. It was a triumph of perseverance, a testament to the power of standing up for what's right even when the odds seem insurmountable. As she hugged Pam tightly, tears streaming down her face, Karoline realized that this was only the beginning. True justice required ongoing effort, a commitment to holding institutions accountable, and ensuring fairness for all. In the months that followed, Karoline and Pam became symbols of hope for countless individuals navigating their own struggles against injustice. Their story served as a reminder that no matter how daunting the challenge, courage and determination can spark meaningful change. And though the scars of the past would always remain, they carried with them the knowledge that they had made a difference not just for themselves but for future generations who deserved a better, fairer world. The courtroom was quieter now, almost serene compared to the chaos that had unfolded earlier. Judge Emily Carter's presence brought a sense of calm, her demeanor radiating fairness and professionalism. Karoline Leavitt sat at the plaintiff's table, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. The arrest of Judge Holloway had been shocking, but it also left her with a lingering question. Would this new judge see the truth in her case? Or would the shadow of what had happened overshadow everything else? As she glanced at Pam Bondi, who was busy organizing documents, Karoline reminded herself to trust the process and the person guiding her through it. Pam sensed Karoline's unease and gave her a reassuring smile. "You've got this," she whispered, her voice soft but confident. It wasn't just encouragement. It was a reminder that they were on solid ground now. With Judge Carter presiding, there was no room for bias or intimidation. This was a fresh start, an opportunity to present their evidence without fear of being dismissed. Still, Pam knew better than to underestimate the opposition. The corporation Karoline was fighting against wasn't going down without a fight. Their attorneys were seasoned professionals, skilled at exploiting loopholes and sowing doubt. But Pam had faced tougher adversaries before, and she wasn't about to back down now. As the proceedings resumed, Karoline took a deep breath and began presenting her case again. This time she spoke with clarity and conviction, laying out the timeline of events that had led her to file the lawsuit. She described how the corporation had misled her, promising opportunities while concealing critical information that directly impacted her livelihood. Her voice wavered occasionally, but she pressed on, determined to make every word count. Behind her, Pam watched closely, ready to interject if necessary. Judge Carter listened intently, occasionally asking questions to clarify details. Unlike Judge Holloway, she seemed genuinely interested in understanding the full picture. The opposing counsel, however, wasted no time trying to undermine Karoline's credibility. They argued that her claims lacked sufficient evidence and accused her of exaggerating the situation for personal gain. Their tone was polite but calculated, designed to plant seeds of doubt in the minds of anyone listening. When it was Pam's turn to speak, she stood up and addressed the court with precision. "Your Honor," she began, "my client has provided documentation, emails, and witness testimonies that corroborate her account. To dismiss these as mere exaggerations is not only inaccurate, but disrespectful to the integrity of this court." Her words carried weight, silencing the defense momentarily. Throughout the trial, Pam meticulously dismantled the corporation's arguments, exposing inconsistencies in their narrative. She highlighted instances where key documents had mysteriously gone missing, suggesting deliberate obstruction. She pointed out discrepancies in witness statements, revealing attempts to mislead the court. Each revelation chipped away at the corporation's facade, forcing them onto the defensive. For Karoline, watching Pam in action was both awe-inspiring and empowering. It reinforced her belief that justice could prevail, even when the odds seemed stacked against her. Outside the courtroom, public interest in the case continued to grow. News outlets covered every development, dissecting the legal strategies and analyzing the implications of Judge Holloway's arrest. Social media buzzed with debates, hashtags like #Justice for Karoline trending as people rallied behind her cause. Supporters organized protests outside courthouses across the country, demanding accountability not just for Karoline's case, but for systemic issues within the judiciary. Meanwhile, critics argued that arresting a judge set a dangerous precedent, warning of potential overreach. The controversy fueled discussions about reform, with experts weighing in on how to balance authority with transparency. Amidst the media frenzy, Karoline found herself thrust into the spotlight. Strangers approached her after court sessions, offering words of encouragement and sharing their own stories of injustice. Some sent letters or messages thanking her for having the courage to stand up. At first, the attention overwhelmed her. She hadn't expected her personal battle to resonate so deeply with others. But as time went on, she embraced it, realizing that her story had become a symbol of hope for those who felt powerless. With Pam's guidance, she learned to navigate interviews and public appearances, using her platform to advocate for change. Back in the courtroom, tensions ran high as closing arguments approached. Both sides prepared their final pitches, knowing that this was their last chance to sway Judge Carter's decision. The corporation's lawyers doubled down on their strategy, emphasizing technicalities and questioning the reliability of Karoline's evidence. They portrayed her as someone seeking revenge rather than justice, hoping to cast doubt on her motives. Pam, however, remained unfazed. In her closing statement, she focused on the bigger picture, reminding the court of the principles at stake. "This isn't just about one individual," she said firmly. "It's about holding powerful entities accountable and ensuring that everyone, regardless of wealth or influence, is treated fairly under the law." When the trial finally concluded, the wait for the verdict felt excruciatingly long. Karoline spent sleepless nights replaying the events in her mind, wondering if she had done enough. Pam reassured her repeatedly, reminding her that they had presented a strong case and that the outcome was ultimately out of their hands. During this period, Karoline leaned heavily on her support system, friends, family, and even strangers who had reached out to offer encouragement. Their kindness kept her grounded, helping her stay hopeful despite the uncertainty. Meanwhile, the investigation into Judge Holloway's misconduct gained momentum. Documents surfaced showing patterns of favoritism including rulings that benefited individuals connected to influential figures. Former colleagues came forward, describing how he used intimidation tactics to silence dissent. One particularly damning revelation involved a secret agreement between Holloway and a prominent lobbyist, raising questions about corruption at the highest levels. Public outrage grew louder, prompting calls for sweeping reforms within the judiciary. Lawmakers introduced bills aimed at increasing transparency and establishing independent oversight committees. In the midst of all this, Karoline found solace in small victories. Every day she woke up knowing she was making progress, not just for herself but for countless others facing similar struggles. She started documenting her journey, writing essays and giving talks about resilience and the importance of standing up for what's right. Her message resonated deeply, inspiring people to confront injustices in their own lives. Pam watched proudly as Karoline transformed from a hesitant plaintiff into a fearless advocate, capable of commanding attention and sparking meaningful conversations. Finally, the day arrived when Judge Carter delivered her verdict. The courtroom was packed, anticipation hanging thick in the air. Karoline sat nervously beside Pam, clutching her hands tightly. When Judge Carter began speaking, her voice was steady and authoritative. She acknowledged the complexity of the case, praising both sides for their thorough presentations. Then, addressing Karoline directly, she stated, "Based on the evidence presented, I find in favor of the plaintiff. The defendant engaged in deceptive practices that caused significant harm, and restitution must be made accordingly." The words hit Karoline like a tidal wave, washing away months of doubt and exhaustion. Tears streamed down her face as she turned to hug Pam, overwhelmed by gratitude. The victory was monumental, not just for Karoline but for everyone invested in the case. It validated her struggle, proving that persistence pays off. For Pam, it reaffirmed her belief in the power of justice, even when the system seems broken. And for the public, it served as a beacon of hope, demonstrating that accountability is possible when people refuse to stay silent. The corporation appealed the decision, dragging the legal battle further, but Karoline remained steadfast. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to face whatever came next. In the months that followed, Karoline and Pam became symbols of resilience and determination. Together, they traveled the country, speaking at conferences, universities, and community events. They shared their story, urging others to challenge injustices and demand transparency. Their partnership evolved into something greater, a movement dedicated to creating lasting change. Along the way, they inspired countless individuals to take action, proving that even the smallest voices can spark revolutions. Though the scars of the past lingered, they carried with them the knowledge that they had made a difference, for themselves and for generations to come. The aftermath of the trial verdict rippled far beyond the confines of the courtroom. Karoline Leavitt's victory wasn't just a personal triumph, it became a rallying cry for those who had long felt silenced by powerful systems. The corporation, now forced to pay restitution and admit its wrongdoing, scrambled to contain the fallout. Their public relations team worked overtime, issuing statements that downplayed the ruling and framing it as an isolated incident. But the damage was done. News outlets dissected every detail of the case, exposing not only the company's unethical practices, but also the broader culture of exploitation that allowed such behavior to thrive unchecked. For Karoline, this was more than vindication. It was validation of her decision to fight back. Pam Bondi stood beside Karoline during the whirlwind of media appearances and interviews that followed. Together they navigated the spotlight with grace, using their platform to highlight systemic issues rather than bask in personal glory. Pam emphasized the importance of accountability, urging lawmakers and citizens alike to demand greater transparency in both corporate and judicial systems. "This case shows us what happens when people refuse to look away," she said during one televised interview. "It's not about revenge or retribution, it's about fairness. Justice isn't blind if it turns a deaf ear to those who need it most." Her words resonated deeply, striking a chord with audiences across the nation. Karoline, too, found her voice growing stronger with each appearance. At first, she struggled with imposter syndrome, questioning whether she truly belonged in the role of advocate. After all, she had never sought fame or recognition. She simply wanted justice for herself. Yet as she met others who shared similar stories of mistreatment, she realized her journey could inspire change on a larger scale. She began speaking candidly about her experiences, sharing moments of vulnerability alongside her triumphs. People responded to her authenticity, flooding social media with messages of support. Hashtags like "Stand with Karoline" and "Justice for All" trended weekly, amplifying calls for reform. Despite the positive momentum, challenges remained. The corporation appealed the verdict, dragging out the legal process and testing Karoline's patience. Lawyers warned her that appeals could take years, potentially exhausting her emotionally and financially. But Karoline refused to give up. With Pam's guidance, she prepared for the next phase of the battle, knowing that persistence was key. "I didn't come this far to let them wear me down," she told friends during a quiet moment. "If I have to keep fighting, then so be it. This is bigger than me now." As the appeal dragged on, Karoline channeled her energy into advocacy work. She partnered with nonprofit organizations focused on consumer rights and judicial reform, lending her story to campaigns aimed at educating the public about predatory practices. She traveled extensively, attending rallies and town halls where ordinary people voiced their frustrations with broken systems. In one particularly moving event, a young woman approached her after a speech, tears streaming down her face. "You've given me hope," the woman said. "I thought no one would ever listen to someone like me." Karoline hugged her tightly, promising that together, they could make a difference. Meanwhile, the investigation into Judge Richard Holloway revealed even darker truths. Documents unearthed during the probe showed a pattern of misconduct stretching back decades. Emails and memos revealed how he had manipulated cases to benefit wealthy clients while punishing those who dared to challenge him. Former clerks recounted instances where he verbally abused staff members, creating a toxic work environment. One particularly damning piece of evidence involved a secret agreement between Holloway and a high-profile lobbyist, detailing favors exchanged in exchange for political support. Public outrage reached a fever pitch, prompting calls for immediate action. Lawmakers responded to the growing pressure by introducing sweeping reforms aimed at increasing transparency and accountability within the judiciary. Bills were drafted to establish independent oversight committees tasked with investigating complaints against judges. Mandatory ethics training programs were proposed for all judicial officials, ensuring that power wouldn't go unchecked. Advocacy groups seized the opportunity to push for additional measures, including stricter penalties for misconduct and protections for whistleblowers. For many, this marked a turning point, a chance to rebuild trust in institutions that had failed so many. Yet, resistance came from unexpected quarters. Some judges and legal professionals argued that the reforms went too far, warning that excessive scrutiny could undermine judicial independence. They claimed that arresting a sitting judge set a dangerous precedent, opening the door for future overreach. Critics accused Pam Bondi of playing politics, suggesting her actions were motivated by ambition rather than principle. Pam dismissed these accusations calmly, pointing out that accountability and independence weren't mutually exclusive. "We can respect authority without excusing abuse," she stated firmly during a press conference. "True justice requires balance." Amidst the debates, Karoline continued to speak out, emphasizing the human cost of unchecked power. She visited schools and community centers, engaging with young people eager to learn about activism and civic responsibility. She encouraged them to question authority respectfully, to stand up for what's right even when it feels impossible. "Change doesn't happen overnight," she often said, "but every voice matters, every action counts. If we stay silent, nothing will improve." Her message inspired countless individuals to take small steps toward making a difference, whether by volunteering, signing petitions, or simply starting conversations. Back home, Karoline faced her own struggles. The stress of the ongoing legal battle weighed heavily on her, Compounded by the lingering trauma of facing Judge Holloway's hostility, sleepless nights became routine, and there were days when self-doubt crept in. Yet she reminded herself of why she started this journey: to create a better future, not just for herself, but for others. She leaned on Pam, her family, and close friends for support, drawing strength from their unwavering belief in her cause. Slowly but surely, she learned to manage the emotional toll, finding solace in journaling and meditation. By the time the appellate court issued its ruling, nearly 2 years had passed since the original verdict. To everyone's relief, the higher court upheld Judge Carter's decision, affirming Karoline's win. The corporation was ordered to pay additional damages, sending a clear message that unethical behavior wouldn't be tolerated. Celebrations erupted nationwide, with supporters gathering outside courthouses to cheer the outcome. Karoline stood before a cheering crowd, overwhelmed by gratitude. "This victory belongs to all of us," she declared, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "Together we prove that justice is possible, even when it feels out of reach." In the months that followed, Karoline and Pam shifted their focus to long-term initiatives. They launched a foundation dedicated to supporting victims of corporate malpractice and advocating for judicial reform. The organization provided resources, legal aid, and mentorship to individuals navigating similar battles. It also funded research projects aimed at identifying systemic flaws and proposing solutions. Through their efforts, they hoped to prevent others from enduring the hardships Karoline had faced. Reflecting on her journey, Karoline marveled at how much had changed, not just in her life but in society as a whole. What began as a personal quest for justice had evolved into a movement capable of inspiring real change. She credited Pam for her steadfast support, acknowledging that none of this would have been possible without her guidance. For Pam, the experience reinforced her belief in the resilience of the human spirit. Together, they proved that courage and determination could overcome even the most daunting obstacles. Though the scars of the past remained, they served as reminders of how far they had come and how much further they could go. As Karoline looked ahead, she envisioned a world where fairness and accountability weren't ideals, but realities. A world where everyone, regardless of wealth or status, could access justice without fear. And though the road ahead would undoubtedly bring new challenges, she faced them with hope, knowing she wasn't alone. With Pam by her side and millions standing behind her, she was ready to continue fighting for justice, for truth, and for a brighter tomorrow. The victory in the appellate court marked a new chapter for Karoline Leavitt, one filled with opportunities to amplify her message and drive meaningful change. With the legal battle finally behind her, she turned her full attention to advocacy, work, determined to ensure that no one else would have to endure what she had faced. The foundation she co-founded with Pam Bondi quickly gained traction, becoming a beacon of hope for countless individuals seeking justice. Its mission was clear: to empower victims of corporate malpractice and judicial misconduct while advocating for systemic reforms that prioritized fairness and transparency. Karoline's days became a whirlwind of activity. She traveled extensively, meeting with lawmakers, activists, and everyday citizens who shared her vision of a more equitable society. Her speeches resonated deeply, blending personal anecdotes with calls to action. At one event, she recounted the moment Judge Holloway dismissed her claims as emotional nonsense, his words echoing in her mind long after he left the courtroom. "That day, I realized something important," she told the audience. "When someone tries to silence you, it's because they're afraid of what you might say. Don't let fear stop you from speaking your truth." Her words inspired thunderous applause, leaving many in tears. Pam Bondi remained a constant presence in Karoline's life, offering guidance and support every step of the way. Though Pam juggled her own legal practice, she made time to help shape the foundation's initiatives, ensuring they aligned with its core values. Together, they spearheaded campaigns aimed at educating the public about their rights and holding powerful entities accountable. One particularly successful initiative involved creating an online portal where people could report instances of abuse or misconduct anonymously. Within weeks, hundreds of submissions poured in, shedding light on issues ranging from workplace harassment to discriminatory practices in housing and healthcare. As the foundation grew, so did its impact. Journalists began covering its efforts, highlighting success stories and underscoring the need for reform. A young woman named Sarah became one of the organization's earliest beneficiaries. After being wrongfully terminated from her job following a complaint about unsafe working conditions, Sarah felt trapped and powerless. But through the foundation's legal aid program, she received pro bono representation and eventually won her case against her former employer. "I didn't think anyone would listen to me," Sarah said during a press conference, "but this foundation gave me a voice and a chance to fight back." While the foundation thrived, the investigation into Judge Richard Holloway continued to unravel shocking details about his conduct. Internal memos revealed how he had manipulated cases to benefit wealthy clients, often ignoring evidence that contradicted his rulings. Former colleagues described a toxic culture within his chambers, where dissent was punished and loyalty demanded. One clerk recounted being reprimanded for questioning a decision that favored a prominent lobbyist, only to later discover the judge had accepted lavish gifts from the same individual. These revelations sparked outrage, prompting calls for stricter oversight mechanisms across the judiciary. Lawmakers responded by passing landmark legislation aimed at increasing accountability. The Judicial Integrity Act, championed by Pam Bondi, and other advocates established independent review boards tasked with investigating complaints against judges. It also mandated annual ethics training for all judicial officials and created whistleblower protections to encourage transparency. For many, this marked a turning point, a tangible step toward rebuilding trust in institutions that had failed so many. Yet critics argued that the reforms didn't go far enough, warning that without proper enforcement, they risked becoming mere formalities. Amidst the debates, Karoline focused on grassroots efforts, believing that real change started. At the community level, she organized town halls and workshops, inviting experts to discuss topics like consumer rights, workplace discrimination, and access to justice. These events drew diverse crowds, fostering dialogue between individuals from different walks of life. During one such gathering, a man stood up to share his story of being denied compensation after suffering injuries due to unsafe working conditions. His voice trembled with emotion, but his resolve was unshakable. "If we don't stand together," he said, "nothing will ever change." Karoline's advocacy extended beyond traditional platforms. She embraced social media, using it to connect with younger audiences and amplify marginalized voices. Her posts often featured bite-sized lessons about legal rights, accompanied by hashtags like "Know Your Rights" and "Justice for All." Followers responded enthusiastically, sharing their own experiences and tagging friends to spread awareness. Some even credited her content with helping them navigate difficult situations, from disputing unfair fines to filing complaints against abusive landlords. For Karoline, these interactions reinforced the power of collective action. Despite the progress, challenges persisted. Corporate lobbyists pushed back against proposed regulations, arguing that increased oversight would stifle innovation and economic growth. Opponents of judicial reform claimed the measures infringed on judicial independence, warning of unintended consequences. Meanwhile, the corporation Karoline had sued attempted to discredit her foundation, accusing it of pursuing a political agenda. Critics labeled her a self-appointed crusader, dismissing her efforts as naive idealism. But Karoline refused to be deterred. "They can call me whatever they want," she said during an interview. "What matters is that we're making a difference, real, measurable change." Behind the scenes, Karoline grappled with the emotional toll of her relentless schedule. The constant travel, late nights, and pressure to maintain momentum left her physically and mentally exhausted. There were moments when self-doubt crept in, whispering that maybe she wasn't cut out for this kind of work. On those days, she leaned heavily on Pam, who reminded her of how far she'd come. "You didn't choose this path, it chose you," Pam often said, "and look at everything you've accomplished already." You're stronger than you think. To cope, Karoline adopted healthier habits prioritizing rest and self-care. She started journaling regularly, pouring her thoughts onto paper as a way to process her emotions. Meditation became part of her daily routine, helping her find calm amidst the chaos. Friends and family rallied around her, offering encouragement and reminding her to celebrate small victories along the way. Slowly but surely, she learned to balance her passion for advocacy with the need to protect her well-being. By the end of the year, the foundation had achieved remarkable milestones. It secured funding from major donors, allowing it to expand its reach and resources. Collaborations with universities led to groundbreaking research on systemic inequities, providing data-driven insights that informed policy proposals. Partnerships with tech companies resulted in innovative tools designed to simplify legal processes for ordinary citizens. Through it all, Karoline remained committed to staying true to the Foundation's mission, ensuring that every decision reflected its core values. Looking back, Karoline marveled at how much had changed, not just in her life but in the world around her. What began as a solitary struggle had blossomed into a movement capable of inspiring real change. She credited Pam for her unwavering support, acknowledging that none of this would have been possible without her mentorship. For Pam, the experience reinforced her belief in the resilience of the human spirit. Together, they proved that courage and determination could overcome even the most daunting obstacles. Though the scars of the past lingered, they served as reminders of how far they had come and how much further they could go. As Karoline looked ahead, she envisioned a world where fairness and accountability weren't ideals but realities. A world where everyone, regardless of wealth or status, could access justice without fear. And though the road ahead would undoubtedly bring new challenges, she faced them with hope, knowing she wasn't alone. With Pam by her side and millions standing behind her, she was ready to continue fighting for justice, for truth, and for a brighter tomorrow. Karoline's journey taught her that change doesn't happen overnight. It requires patience, persistence, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. But above all, it requires courage. The courage to speak up, to challenge authority, and to believe in the possibility of a better future. As she stood before cheering crowds, addressing packed auditoriums, and connecting with strangers online, she carried this lesson with her, sharing it with anyone willing to listen. Because in the end, justice isn't just about winning battles. It's about building a world where everyone has a fair shot at happiness and dignity. The momentum behind Karoline Leavitt's advocacy work continued to grow, reaching corners of society she had never imagined. Her foundation became a household name, synonymous with hope and resilience. People from all walks of life, students, retirees, single parents, and small business owners, reached out to share their stories or seek guidance. Each message reinforced her belief that the fight for justice wasn't just about one person. It was about creating a system where everyone could thrive without fear of exploitation or abuse. The more she listened, the more determined she became to push forward. Pam Bondi remained an integral part of this journey, balancing her own legal career with her role as Karoline's mentor and ally. Together, they refined the Foundation's strategies, ensuring that its initiatives addressed both immediate needs and long-term goals. One of their most ambitious projects involved partnering with educational institutions to develop curricula focused on civic responsibility and ethical leadership. They believed that empowering future generations with knowledge would lay the groundwork for lasting change. Universities across the country embraced the idea, incorporating these lessons into law schools, business programs, and even high school classrooms. At the heart of their efforts was a commitment to inclusivity. Karoline insisted that the Foundation prioritize marginalized communities, recognizing that systemic inequities often hit them hardest. She traveled to rural towns and underserved urban neighborhoods, hosting workshops tailored to local challenges. In one community plagued by predatory lending practices, she collaborated with financial experts to teach residents how to identify scams and protect their assets. In another, she worked with immigrant families to navigate complex legal systems, offering free consultations and translation services. These grassroots efforts not only provided practical solutions, but also fostered trust, a crucial element in any movement for change. As word spread, the foundation attracted volunteers eager to contribute their skills. Lawyers offered pro bono hours, graphic designers created impactful campaigns, and tech-savvy individuals built apps to streamline access to resources. A college student named Marcus developed a mobile app allowing users to report misconduct anonymously while connecting them with relevant support networks. "I wanted to do something meaningful," he explained during a launch event. "This foundation showed me that even small contributions can make a big difference." His innovation earned widespread praise, further amplifying the foundation's reach. Meanwhile, the fallout from Judge Richard Holloway's misconduct continued to reverberate through the legal community. Following his conviction on multiple counts of corruption, disciplinary actions were taken against other judges implicated in similar scandals. The Judicial Integrity Act proved instrumental in holding officials accountable, leading to reforms that extended beyond state lines. Lawmakers cited the act as a model for addressing institutional flaws, sparking discussions about implementing similar measures in other sectors. For many, it symbolized a turning point, a recognition that unchecked, power inevitably leads to abuse, yet resistance persisted. Powerful interests fought back fiercely, pouring millions into lobbying campaigns aimed at diluting proposed regulations. Corporations accused reform advocates of stifling economic growth, framing accountability measures as unnecessary burdens. Critics argued that increased oversight would discourage talented individuals from pursuing careers in law or public service. But Karoline refused to back down. During a heated debate on national television, she countered these claims with unwavering conviction. "Accountability isn't a burden, it's a safeguard," she said. "It protects us all, ensuring that no one is above the law." Her words resonated deeply, inspiring others to join the cause. Activists organized marches and rallies demanding stronger protections for workers, consumers, and vulnerable populations. Social media played a pivotal role in mobilizing supporters, with hashtags like Kaki Fair Justice and Taki No More Silence trending globally. Celebrities lent their voices to the movement, using their platforms to highlight pressing issues and amplify calls for action. Even corporations began taking notice, issuing statements pledging to adopt more ethical practices, though skeptics questioned whether these promises would translate into tangible changes. Amidst the whirlwind, Karoline found moments of quiet reflection. Late at night, after the day's events had wound down, she often sat alone in her study, journaling or simply staring out the window. These solitary moments allowed her to process everything she had experienced, the victories, the setbacks, the weight of responsibility. Sometimes doubt crept in, whispering that maybe she wasn't equipped to lead such a monumental effort. But then she remembered the faces of the people she had met along the way, the young mother fighting for fair housing, the elderly man seeking compensation for medical negligence, the teenager dreaming of a world where fairness wasn't negotiable. Their stories reminded her why she couldn't give up. To recharge, Karoline leaned on her support system. Pam remained her rock, offering wisdom and encouragement whenever she needed it. Friends and family rallied around her, reminding her to celebrate milestones no matter how small. On weekends, she escaped to the countryside, hiking trails surrounded by towering trees and serene lakes. Nature provided a sense of perspective, grounding her in the present moment and renewing her determination to keep going. She also sought therapy, acknowledging that mental health was just as important as physical well-being. Through open conversations with her therapist, she learned to navigate the emotional complexities of her journey. By the end of the second year since the appellate court's ruling, the foundation achieved significant milestones. It successfully lobbied for the passage of several landmark bills, including legislation protecting whistleblowers and strengthening consumer rights. Collaborations with international organizations expanded its global footprint, addressing cross-border issues like human trafficking and environmental exploitation. Awards poured in, recognizing the foundation's impact and innovation. Yet, Karoline viewed these accolades not as endpoints, but as stepping stones toward greater achievements. One particularly poignant moment came when a former adversary reached out to commend her work. The corporation she had sued initially dismissed her as a nuisance, but years later, its CEO acknowledged the value of her advocacy. "You've forced us to confront uncomfortable truths," he wrote in a letter. "While we may disagree on methods, your commitment to fairness is undeniable." Though skeptical at first, Karoline appreciated the gesture, seeing it as evidence that change, even incremental, was possible. Looking ahead, Karoline envisioned expanding the Foundation's scope to tackle emerging challenges. Climate justice, digital privacy, and artificial intelligence ethics topped her list of priorities. She believed that staying ahead of societal shifts required constant adaptation and innovation. To achieve this, she assembled a diverse team of experts, each bringing unique perspectives to the table. Their brainstorming sessions often lasted late into the night, fueled by passion and purpose. Ideas flowed freely, transforming abstract concepts into actionable plans. Through it all, Karoline never forgot the lessons she had learned along the way. Justice wasn't a destination. It was a journey, one fraught with obstacles but rich with opportunities for growth. Every setback taught resilience, every victory inspired humility, and every connection forged reminded her of the collective power of humanity. As she stood before cheering crowds or addressed packed auditoriums, she carried these truths with her, sharing them with anyone willing to listen. In the end, Karoline's story transcended personal triumph. It became a testament to the enduring power of courage, compassion, and collaboration. With Pam by her side and millions standing behind her, she faced the future with optimism, knowing that the work was far from over. But she also knew that together, they could create a world where fairness and accountability weren't ideals but realities. A world where everyone, regardless of wealth or status, could access justice without fear. And though the road ahead would undoubtedly bring new challenges, she embraced them with hope, ready to continue fighting for truth, for dignity, and for a brighter tomorrow. As the years passed, Karoline Leavitt's foundation evolved into a global force for justice, inspiring countless individuals and organizations to join the movement. What had started as a personal battle against corporate malpractice and judicial misconduct transformed into a beacon of hope for those fighting systemic inequities worldwide. The Foundation's impact reached far beyond its original goals, touching lives in ways Karoline could never have imagined. It became more than an organization. It was a symbol of resilience, proof that even the smallest voices could spark monumental change. Pam Bondi remained steadfast by Karoline's side, her wisdom and experience guiding every step of the journey. Together, they tackled emerging challenges with the same determination that had fueled their early victories. Climate justice became one of their top priorities, addressing how environmental degradation disproportionately affected marginalized communities. They partnered with scientists, activists, and policymakers to advocate for sustainable practices and hold corporations accountable for pollution and deforestation. Their efforts led to landmark agreements, including stricter emissions regulations and funding for renewable energy projects in underserved areas. Digital privacy also emerged as a pressing issue, particularly as technology advanced at breakneck speed. Karoline recognized that while innovation brought incredible opportunities, it also introduced vulnerabilities, exploitation of personal data, surveillance, and algorithmic bias. To address these concerns, the Foundation launched a campaign called Protect Your Data, educating people about their rights online and advocating for stronger cybersecurity laws. Tech companies initially resisted, arguing that regulation would stifle progress. But when whistleblowers exposed unethical practices within some of the largest firms, public outcry forced them to reconsider. Slowly but surely, meaningful reforms began to take shape. Artificial intelligence posed another challenge, raising questions about ethics and accountability. As AI systems grew more sophisticated, so did their potential for misuse, discriminatory algorithms, biased decision-making, and unchecked power in the hands of developers. Karoline convened panels of experts to explore solutions, emphasizing transparency and inclusivity in design processes. One breakthrough came when the foundation collaborated with universities to create ethical guidelines for AI development. These principles were adopted globally, ensuring that innovation served humanity rather than harming it. Throughout this evolution, Karoline never lost sight of the foundation's roots. She continued to prioritize grassroots advocacy, believing that real change happened on the ground. Her travels took her to remote villages and bustling cities alike, where she listened to stories of struggle and resilience. In one community devastated by natural disasters exacerbated by climate change, she worked alongside locals to rebuild homes and restore livelihoods. In another, she supported indigenous groups fighting to protect their ancestral lands from mining companies. Each interaction reinforced her belief that justice wasn't just about policy, it was about people. The foundation's success attracted attention from leaders across industries, eager to collaborate or learn from its model. Corporations, once resistant to reform, sought partnerships, recognizing the value of aligning with ethical initiatives. Some went beyond lip service, implementing internal audits and transparency measures inspired by the foundation's work. Critics accused Karoline of compromising her values, suggesting she had grown too cozy with powerful interests. But she dismissed these claims, pointing out that collaboration didn't mean capitulation. Change isn't black and white, she often said. It's messy, complicated, and sometimes uncomfortable. But if we refuse to engage, nothing will improve. Despite the accolades and achievements, Karoline faced moments of doubt. The weight of responsibility occasionally felt overwhelming, especially when setbacks reminded her of how much work remained. A proposed bill aimed at protecting gig workers' rights faltered under corporate lobbying. A whistleblower seeking asylum faced deportation after exposing corruption in a major tech firm. Each failure tested her resolve, forcing her to confront the limitations of her influence. Yet she drew strength from the network of supporters who stood beside her, reminding her that progress was rarely linear. To maintain balance, Karoline embraced routines that nurtured both body and mind. Morning runs through quiet parks cleared her head, while evenings spent painting or writing poetry provided creative outlets. Meditation sessions helped her stay grounded, teaching her to embrace uncertainty without losing hope. Therapy remained a cornerstone of her self-care, offering tools to navigate stress and anxiety. Friends joked that she had become a poster child for holistic living, but they admired her commitment to leading by example. After all, advocating for justice required not just passion, but sustainability. By the 5th anniversary of the appellate court's ruling, the foundation celebrated remarkable milestones. Its legal aid program had assisted over 50,000 individuals, securing millions in restitution for victims of corporate malpractice. Educational initiatives reached hundreds of thousands of students, equipping them with knowledge to challenge injustice. Partnerships with governments and NGOs expanded its reach, tackling issues like human trafficking, refugee rights, and healthcare access. Awards lined the walls of its headquarters, each plaque representing hard-fought victories. Yet Karoline viewed these achievements not as endpoints, but as stepping stones toward greater aspirations. One evening, during a gala honoring the foundation's impact, Pam Bondi delivered a speech that captured the essence of their journey. 5 years ago, we stood here uncertain of what lay ahead, she began, her voice steady yet emotional. Today, we stand here knowing that courage can move mountains, that persistence pays off, and that together, we are unstoppable. The room erupted in applause, tears streaming down faces as attendees reflected on how far they had come. For Karoline, the moment was bittersweet, a celebration of triumph tempered by the knowledge that the fight was far from over. Looking to the future, Karoline envisioned bold new horizons. Space exploration raised questions about resource allocation and extraterrestrial governance, topics the Foundation planned to address proactively. Mental health awareness campaigns sought to destigmatize conversations around trauma and healing. Efforts to combat misinformation online gained urgency as social media platforms grappled with rising polarization. Each initiative represented an opportunity to adapt, innovate, and expand the Foundation's mission. Through it all, Karoline carried lessons learned along the way. Justice wasn't a destination, it was a journey, one fraught with obstacles but rich with opportunities for growth. Every setback taught resilience, every victory inspired humility, and every connection forged reminded her of the collective power of humanity. As she stood before cheering crowds or addressed packed auditoriums, she carried these truths with her, sharing them with anyone willing to listen. In the end, Karoline's story transcended personal triumph. It became a testament to the enduring power of courage, compassion, and collaboration. With Pam by her side and millions standing behind her, she faced the future with optimism, knowing that the work was far from over. But she also knew that together, they could create a world where fairness and accountability weren't ideals but realities. A world where everyone, regardless of wealth or status, could access justice without fear. And though the road ahead would undoubtedly bring new challenges, she embraced them with hope, ready to continue fighting for truth, for dignity, and for a brighter tomorrow.